Hi, BookTube. This is a unscheduled, very lightly scripted little video that I decided to make. I just wanted you to know that I watch other BookTube creators mainly when I'm cooking or exercising. I have a stationary bike and it can hold my laptop. So I watch a lot of videos while I'm pedaling, which makes writing comments a bit tricky, but I manage. Or I watch content at the weekend when I batch cook. So I have the laptop up on a stand, above all the mess and chaos, and my Bluetooth headphones on, and that's how I keep in touch with all of you. So I was watching two videos at the weekend. One was made by Gareth at Books, Songs and Other Magic, and Gareth told me that his video was a response to a video made by Steve Donahue on the previous Tuesday. So I used Gareth's link and I watched Steve's video as well, and I'm going to leave links to both of those in my description box. So Steve was asking the BookTube community, and in particular people who read a little of everything, he called them omnivorous readers. He wanted to know, how do those readers choose the next book they're going to read, and where did they get their reading recommendations? They were good videos, both of them, and they got me thinking, because I think I qualify, don't I, as an omnivorous reader? I mean, you could accuse me of being a bit of a cowardly one because I'm deficient when it comes to darker fiction, but I do want to improve my reading diet that way. So I see that changing. So yes, choosing what book to read next, it's a little job in itself. And given, the vast number of books that are available to read. Both Steve and Garrett, they talked about this business of being a mood reader, and I'm not sure whether I'm a mood reader. The term never seemed to fit me. I do have feelings about books. I mean, maybe I should establish that. I get excited looking at my books just sitting there on the shelves. I get excited if I browse in a library or a bookshop. I love to buy books. I anticipate reading them. I feel sad about letting go of them. But what I think people mean when they say a mood reader, okay, I hope I get this right. This is my best summary based on a lot of the different videos I watched. I think mood readers, they get excited in all the ways I talked about, yeah. But when it comes to choosing a book, I think what they mean is they kind of wait for some intuitive, they wait for the same kind of feeling that I do when I'm picking a tarot card. When I lay out a spread of tarot cards, I may ask myself a question, but then I'll hold my hands over the pile of cards and I will wait for a bit of a sense of electricity. It'll sometimes be like in the back of my teeth or something, a sharp feeling, and then I'll go for that card. If that's not how it works for you guys, that was my best guess. And then when they open up the book and they start to read, they're expecting the book, something should happen, right? When they open the book, something quite good. Whatever that something is, whatever keeps them from closing the covers and putting them back on the shelf, if all that is right, then the mood has been captured, and the something is what fuels them to finish the book, and not DNF it. So if that's mood reading, if I've got the definition right, then I'm not a mood reader. When I choose a book, it's a very businesslike decision, actually. And I make almost a contractual commitment to the book, which I know sounds a bit weird, but it is to me. It's like a job on a to-do list. I say, okay, I'm going to read this book. Then I mean, I'm going to read this book. I may feel things while I'm reading, sure. But I always try to push through that, because it's difficult to know when you feel feelings, what they actually mean. My aim, of course, is always to know the book. What is it that I am reading? Not so much do I feel good all the time I'm reading it. That's not necessarily important. I have expectations for the book, because you do. A genre book comes to you, you think this should be a genre book, I would think. But I hold them really lightly. Like, they're based on what I may know about, as I say, the genre, the year the book was published. But that's just information for the journey. That just helps me, it gives me a vague sense of what I might encounter. Maybe you could say I'm a mood reader in the sense that if I've read a lot of very demanding, dense, particularly non-fiction books, I do try to schedule in some lighter reading. I do try to pick something, but I'm really businesslike about that as well. So now, let's say I have 2-3 really heavy books, then I stop. I read a thriller, a cozy mystery or something, and then I just go straight back to reading the heavy stuff. That's my little coffee break, if you like, from demanding reading. Now, one thing The Steve Donahue video asked a really specific question also about sources of influence or sources of recommendations. Where do people go to make their book choices if we don't consider ourselves to be mood readers? And I don't. So it means that something must be helping us make our decision about what books to look at next. And I looked to a lot of sources. It got me thinking. I thought, how many different places do I tend to hear about books that influence me to want to read those books? BookTube is the latest edition, but there's quite a lot more. And it struck me that sometimes it's an individual recommendation that does it, but sometimes it's a combination of influences that are picking those books for me. So what are those things? Here we go. This is my list. Number one influence is time. The longer a book has been published, the longer a book remains in the public eye, that it remains in print, continues to attract new readers. That's a kind of recommendation all by itself. Time can justify reading an older book, or can also justify reading a new book by an author whose previous work has achieved that kind of long-term consensus. Stephen King. I mean, the man has just proven himself. Such a good track record. And you see that consensus as well in all these online lists. I love online lists. Maybe I could call them, next to BookTube, sort of the number one thing I love to check on. Publishers Weekly. They have Wikipedia pages that list the top-selling books in the United States in a particular year. I like to check that out. I like to look at the Times Literary Supplement, have the 100 most influential books since the end of the Second World War. And there's a really good one. Just a second. Let's see if I find it here in my notes. It's the Online Community Library Center, or OCLC. They have this fantastic recommendation list of 500 titles. So that's number one, time. Number two, experience. On BookTube, I look for readers that prove their experience as readers. So I am leaning more toward older BookTubers, not entirely, but it's just that they've usually read more books. And because I'm finding on the younger end of BookTube, you've got this stretching age range of readers who are doing YA, and so that they're reading it exclusively, or if they're not reading YA, they're into adult fiction. But there is a kind of adult fiction which is written to be light and quickly consumed and forgotten, and I can tell from the titles they're picking that's mostly what they're into. And I want to know that people have gone deeper than that, because I'm going to be wanting to go deeper than that. Simple as. So I look for omnivorous readers of fiction, or if I'm looking for genre recommendations, yes, then I might seek out someone who's just decided to do a deep dive. They only do science fiction, fantasy, they only do horror, they only do romance, because they will know that genre really, really well. I look for readers with academic qualifications, publishing or book industry experience, teachers, readers who are writers, because writers should be experienced readers, should they not? And also creators who aren't reviewing the latest releases for the most part. Reviewing older books that are out of print, is a labor of love, because it isn't. I use time as an example and said, some books last the test of time. Some books don't, but that doesn't make them unworthy of attention. And there are a few booktubers who they go out of their way to go searching in the dark, dark corners of out-of-print land, in the dark corners of secondhand bookshops, and they're finding worthwhile reads. And it's really brilliant that they're bringing those to light. So I do rely on booktubers a lot for that kind of thing. And then experience outside of BookTube, that's quite expansive as well. Librarians, always librarians. I haven't yet met a qualified librarian who did not choose their career because they love reading. Maybe there are some out there, but I haven't met them yet, thank goodness. Then there's magazines. I do look at the Bookseller and Publishers Weekly websites, not as often as I wish, but you sometimes only need one visit to come up with a real gem. Like today I was in Publishers Weekly website, that's 18th of June today. I checked out their fall 2024 new releases, and I learned that a previously unpublished novel by Zora Neale Hurston called The Life of Herod the Great, which was written in the 1950s, but no one's known about it, that's going to finally be released by Amistad in January 2025. That's going to be in Kindle and hardback format. So I thought, hey, it's not really breaking my Read What You Own rule to pre-order. So I have pre-ordered that book and it'll be delivered next January, which is great. And then we got to talk about podcasts. Before I knew about BookTube, podcasts was a huge source of book recommendations. And I can name a few specific ones. The BBC World Service World Book Club. That's a good one. CBC's The Last Chapter. Also in the BBC History Today podcast, or on the CBC for sciencey, environmental, Quirks and Quarks. Fantastic program. And they usually have book recommendations. And then apart from podcasts, what else? Literary prize long lists, if I can know the identity of the judges, which I can for the Booker, I think also for the Pulitzer. I like to look at the long lists. The short lists and the winner are interesting. It's lovely that they got there. But there can be some real jewels in the long list that don't make it to the short. There's still good books in there. And then bookshop employees. Now, note of caution. Like you need it. You're all experienced readers. You're all like, yes, we know. Not all employees who work in bookshops are experienced, enthusiastic readers. You're right. And those staff recommendation notes that appear on bookshelves, I don't know whether staff actually write them unless you're talking about the marketing department. But occasionally you do find a treasure in a bookshop. You find a kind of misplaced librarian. And although that happens more often in secondhand bookshops than in new bookshops. And finally, I do have a few, it's a small number, of bookish face-to-face friends, family, work colleagues. And the only concession that I'd say I do make to mood reading is every once in a while, someone who knows me and knows I love books will walk up to me and say, "Ooh, would you like to read my book?" Not their book that they've written. I mean, they've read a book and they liked it. So they think, Heather reads books. And they'll come up and hand me a book. And it may or may not be exactly the kind of thing I read, although I do have a few work colleagues who not only know that I read, but they've got my tastes down. They know them. Yeah. If someone lends me a book, I will rearrange my book reading schedule to fit that book in as soon as I can, because I don't like getting the reputation of being one of those people that borrows a book and then you never, ever see it again. I don't like that. But back to Steve's video, because he did ask, do people read book reviews? The kind of things that appear in, I don't know, the New York Review of Books, the Times Literary Supplement. And it is odd because I like reading book reviews, but not before I've read the book. There's something that I'll often check in once I've read a book. Then I like to check out the reviews, because it's almost like having a friend who's is just as well read as you are, and you think, oh, I'm gonna see what their opinion was of this book. I've read it now, so I can when they give me their opinion, I'm gonna have enough knowledge of the book in my head to know, yeah, that rings true. I think they've made a good point there. Or I can go, oh, it's a bit harsh. I think you should consider this or that or that. I can have a dialogue in my mind with that reviewer. I would love to subscribe to something like the Times Literary Supplement or the New York Review of Books. But right now, with existing commitments, I wouldn't read them. It really would be money not very well spent. And the quantity of books that are already published with a reasonable critical reputation, it's more than sufficient for my present rate of consumption. If fate smiles on me, and one day, I am allowed to retire from full-time work, then I would definitely want a subscription to one of those literary supplements. Let's talk about, though, just in closing, what I don't use for book recommendations, really, at all. Book Talk. Somebody's got to tell me, what has Book Talk got to offer that BookTube wasn't already providing? I don't value a review just because it's quick. I'm the opposite, because to me, books are something I want to get to know. So I want a sense that the reviewer really knows the book. And I there's no way I can tell that on TikTok. I can't even tell with TikTok whether somebody actually has read the book or not. Whereas with BookTube, I'm getting better, I think, at telling. I don't use BookTok. I don't use Twitter. I don't use Goodreads. I mean, I've looked in there and sort of thought, oh, look at that. There's some recommendations. I think I looked in there once to gauge what the overall opinion was of a book that I thought could be strongly liked and or strongly disliked, and the statistics kind of they kind of made good evidence to back up my theory. So I don't look at Goodreads. Not really interested. Don't have a Goodreads account. I don't look at any celebrity book promotions, and I don't go in for any of those book subscription services. I do not like other people choosing my books. I thought, yeah, I don't mind if people recommend. I don't mind if people shake a book on camera and say, you must read this. That's fine. They can do that as much as they like. But I would not want them to then mail that book to me. I wouldn't appreciate that. So that's my little lowdown on how on the sources of recommendations. I mean, what helps me to choose too are other things, and maybe I could talk a little bit about that as well, because it's limitations as well as recommendations that I think help an omnivorous reader like me. So I have 3 different kinds of limitations on my reading, which help me to narrow down which of the many, many recommended books I'll try to read. I mean, I've got quantity limitations. There really are only so many books that I can read, and I have a pretty good idea how many that is. So that's fine. So we know that I'm a 4 book a month person, really. 5 now and again, I surprise myself. And this is, I only really manage over 4 if the books in question are sort of under 350 pages each. And then secondly, I've got source limitations. So the Read What You Own challenge, for example, it's been a benefit because the source I'm now focusing on are these messy shelves that I have photographed for you, because they've tidied up a little bit, but I think you would probably look at them and go, still a long way to go. There's still a long way to go. Even so, by focusing on what I own, that has been brilliant. And I think I would want to keep some kind of source limitation in my planning for the year, because it really helps me focus. Try to pick from these books, not every book in the world, because that's just too much. So I limit my sources. And of course, I will continue to limit the number of books I buy. I'll get a bit more generous. I still have one book I could buy during this Read What You Own challenge year and not break all my self-imposed rules. But we shall see. And library books really matter to me. So I like to read a lot of, so again, that's a limited source. It depends what's in the library on any given visit. But I like that. Limiting my source helps me make up my mind. Knowing that I already have a limited quantity and then I'm limiting my source, it just brings down the pool of possible books to choose from. So that helps me a bit. In addition to quantity and source limitations, there's also quality limitations that help as well. You know that I always balance fiction and nonfiction. It matters to me. I know other people must think that's a bit strange, but I like to know that I'm reading equally as much of one as the other. And then my fiction, I like to really watch the diversity. So diversity of genre, diversities of authors. I don't like to read the same author too close together. 2 works by the same author too close together. And then representation of all kinds of things, of ethnicities, of sexuality, of gender, of race, age. There's all kinds of different ways you can splice that. And I try to as much as possible. And I think the limitations in the structure that I impose on my reading, they make sure that I read very widely. I don't think I'm a great mood reader. I really feel like there's enough resources for me to make up my own mind. And once I made up my own mind, I usually have a good idea of, what I really want to get through, and I can structure it using those limitations that I talked about. That usually gets me to focus in. And that's it, guys. That's my strange contribution to this discussion, if indeed it becomes a discussion. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. I am working on a nonfiction review for you, also another tag video, finishing a novel by Bernardine Evaristo, so that should be done by the weekend, so that's another one. I think Saturday's going to be a big filming day. I can feel that coming on. Okay. Nice to chat with you again. Look forward to seeing you in a few days' time, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.